Cyber attacks against web applications happen every single day, and it is the job of SOC teams to catch them before real damage is done. But how exactly do analysts detect these threats in the noise of everyday traffic? In this video, we're diving into the core techniques that SOC or security operations centers rely on to spot attacks in real time, including log analysis, network packet capture, and of course, application firewalls. We will not just talk theory. We will also walk through a hands-on example using the Detecting Web Attacks room on TryHackMe. Together, we will investigate suspicious activity, analyze logs, and learn how SOC teams piece together the evidence to confirm and respond to an attack. By the end of this video, you will have a solid understanding of how SOC teams detect web attacks, and you will get to practice those skills yourself. So let's get started. Now let's talk about client-side web attacks. Example of client-side web attacks are cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery. These kind of attacks take place in the user's browser. So basically all the attacker needs is a browser to execute the attack. These attacks basically exploit vulnerabilities in browsers or trick the user into performing unsafe actions, such as clicking on links or loading a page in the background to gain access to accounts and steal sensitive information. As to detecting the client-side attacks, it needs strict browser security control because from the SOC perspective, it doesn't generate, these attacks do not generate enough traffic or enough logs in the server side to be detected upon inspection. The other type of web attacks is server-side attacks. As the name implies, server-side attacks take place in the backend or in the server. So basically the attacker exploits a vulnerability within the web server, the underlying code, or exploits certain misconfigurations on the server side. Example of server-side web attacks are, we have SQL injection, which if successful leads to database compromise, and on an advanced level it could lead to OS compromise. We have command injection, where an attacker passes command unfiltered and executed by the system, and also we have brute force, where the attacker is able to repeatedly attempt different usernames and passwords in order to gain access to the server. It could be SSH, it could be an FTP, and basically these kind of attacks are somewhat easily to detect if the SOC team has the resources to monitor these attacks, because they generate a lot of noise on the server side. So just by inspecting the logs or the network traffic, it can reveal the suspicious behavior. One of the most simple and plain ways to inspect the log is by going over what's called as the access logs. This file stores information about the web requests, specifically saying the HTTP requests that get sent to your web server. These requests contain, the access log file contains valuable information. For example, in the room here we have sample line from the access log. When you open the access log, you will see lines similar to this line. So you see we have the IP address. This represents the IP address of the device that sent the request. Then we have the timestamp. Then we have the request type. This is GET HTTP request, and then we have the page that was retrieved from the server, and then we have basically here the status code. 200 indicates that the page was served without any issues, and then we have the response size, and lastly here we have login.html, which is the referrer, and lastly we have the user agent. Okay, now basically one note here is that the user agent here shows Mozilla 5.0. When a web server is under attack, it shows, or sometimes it shows different user agents, such as here, as you can see SQL map or WP scan in the user agent, which indicates scanning or exploitation attempt. Okay, in the example here we have a sequence of logs, usually can be seen in an access log file. Now these sequence of logs represent an attack chain. You see, first the attack chain starts with a sequence of requests to discover directories. You see all the requests come from the same IP address. They are GET requests, as can be seen here, and these requests are probing valid directories. Test directory, this one got 404 because it doesn't exist. Then we have catalog, and we have login, and we have WordPress. The requests to these directories returned 200 response code, which means these directories were successfully discovered by the attacker. How do you know that this is an attack? Because you see the user agent. The user agent here shows GoBuster, which indicates the tool that was used to discover the directories. It was GoBuster. After the attacker discovered valid directories, the attacker next started to send post requests. These post requests aim at brute forcing the login form so that if the attack is successful, the hacker will be able to log into the user's account. You see the user agent shows Hydra because this is the tool that was used to brute force the login form. At the end, we see after these sequential requests to /login, we see a request to get request to /account, and it is 200 response code, which means that the attack was successful and the attacker guessed or brute forced the correct username and password. At the end, after the attacker gained access to the user's account, we see the attacker sending two GET requests here to /search. Search bars are, at the end, they are input fields, which means they are test experiments and test fields for SQL and cross-site scripting attack. Here we see the full SQL payload that the attacker used in the injection, and we see the user agent, which shows SQL map. These kind of logs are essential to inspect to detect such type of attacks. It's worth mentioning that inspecting the logs has limitations because these logs only show the request, post, or GET, or the request type along with the IP, the page that was accessed, and the user agent. However, if we want to see the body of the request, whether it is post or GET, which may sometimes contain substantial information such as the credentials used, the payloads injected, all this information we call the post body data or the GET request body data. These information are not included in the access logs. Okay, so inspecting the logs has limitations that we need to be aware of. Okay, now let's catch up with the questions of the tasks. So in task 2, we got 2 questions. What class of attacks relies on exploiting the user's behavior or device? We mentioned this is the kind of web attacks called client-side. What's the most common client-side attack? It is cross-site scripting, according to the room. Now, task 3. What class of attacks relies on exploiting vulnerabilities within web servers? Everything that is related to web servers, it is server-side attacks. Which server-side attack lets attackers abuse forms to dump database contents? It is the SQL injection or SQLI. Log-based detection. All right, now let's have a look at the lab machine. So the lab machine, we are given a sample access log. This is the access log of the web server. The web server could be Apache, Nginx, or in the case of IIS, it's also the access log. So we click on the access log, and here we see the access logs. These represent the requests sent by visitors. In our case here, we are drawn to analyze the attacker's requests. So right off the bat, we see a GET request or several GET requests sequentially. And as you can see here, most of the requests are between 200 and 404, meaning some of the pages are literally correctly guessed by the attacker and some are not. The unique aspect here is the FFUF or the user agent. FFUF is a tool that's used for fuzzing everything you can or everything you want. Fuzzing directories, fuzzing URL parameters. It can be used just for anything. Up to this point, the attacker used FFUF, and it looks like the attacker is probing for the directories. So we see the attacker probes login, social, images, manage, corporate, company. And while doing so, the attacker was receiving miscellaneous, or actually 2 types of responses. It was either 200 or 404. In the case of 200, the attacker received a valid response on the login page and another valid response on the catalog. After that, we see also GET requests, but this time with different user agent. You see the user agent now is Mozilla 5.0 Hydra. Hydra is a tool that's used for password cracking. It means now the attacker, after having figured out the login page, which is in our case login.php, the attacker then shifted the focus on cracking the username or brute forcing the username and password by using Hydra. You see all the requests now are sent to GET. So now we have a combination of directory discovery and brute force attacks. Then you see here we have post requests, again with Hydra. And after the last post request, we see 3 GET requests. And these GET requests are sent, 2 of them were sent to /account, and the last one were sent to /account change username.php, and we have a URL encoded. If we were to decode this using an online tool such as URL decoder, we get what seems to be an SQL injection payload. So if you go back, the attacker started fuzzing directories, the attacker guessed or figured the login form, the attacker started using Hydra to brute force for the username and password, ended up logging in with the right combinations, and then because you see the attacker now accessing slash account. That's how I know. And lastly, using the SQL map stable, the attacker conducted an SQL injection attack using SQL map, and that was the payload or the last payload the attacker used. Probably not the attacker wanted to have authenticated access to perform SQL injection in order to dump the complete database. So going back to the questions, what's the attacker's user agent? While performing the directory fuzz, we figured it was FFUF. We're going to have to copy the full version. And what's the name of the page which the attacker performs a brute force attack? It has to be the login because the brute force only works on login pages. Of course, you're brute forcing for username and password. It could be brute force for something else. Slash login.php. And the last one is what's the complete decoded? We already found this. The answer for that. Nope. What's the complete decoded SQLi payload the attacker uses on change username.php? Okay. So it looks like here we're going to have to cancel maybe the spaces or write one because the payload here is different. Let's copy this part first. So first we have the percentage, and then the single quote apostrophe, and then we have plus. Let's write only or. And then, yeah, the plus here, actually, we shouldn't have written plus or included plus in the answer because the plus here stands for it is the space in URL format. So basically here it is the space. That's why we got the wrong answer. Then space, and we copy this, and we got it right this time. Another way of detecting web attacks is by looking at the packet captures. So here we have a packet capture that contains exactly the packets that were exchanged between the attacker and the server in question. Analyzing these packets is actually more beneficial and give much more details than analyzing the logs because you will be able to see the actual data that has been or that have been transferred between the attacker and the server. If you remember in the previous tasks, we were looking at the access log. So this is another look now at the access log. You see, we only have limited data about the attack. We only have the request type, the page that was requested, the user agent. Why all of this gives us a good look on what happened. However, we want details to be able to prevent such attacks from happening in the future and to write an exact report. We want much more details than this. So that's why we need packet captures. Okay. Since we're looking for web attacks, we're going to use a filter or the filter HTTP. And this way we are able to narrow down the packets only to the HTTP packets. So if you look again at the packets, we see the exact same sequence we saw earlier while analyzing the access log. You see the exact sequence. First, a request to login, then to social images, and then manage, corporate. If you look back to Wireshark, see the exact similar to what we saw earlier in the access log. However, here we can right-click and have a look at the actual data. This is the body of the request. Here we have the response. You can see the response from the server. This is the actual page that was sent from the server to the attacker. That's why we need packet captures. All right, so now if we go back to the packet capture, we see here we have a sequence of GET requests, and then we have a request to /login. All these requests are GET, and then we have POST. Now, what we want to know here, we want to find out what were the pair of credentials the attacker was able to figure out and uncover. To do that, we're going to have to look at the last two POST requests to the login page, because after these two requests, the attacker was able to log in and get the account of the user by sending a GET request to /account. So if we look here to the previous two requests, mainly /login, this is packet number 343 and packet number 326. You can either right-click and follow TCP stream, HTTP stream, or you can just do that from here. You can look at the details by looking at the lower pane on the left. Click on HTML form, encode URL encoded data, and we can see the data that was sent from the attacker to the server. Here, the attacker tried to log in as admin and password. However, he got 302 response, which means these were not valid. If you look at /admin, admin summertime, we've got 2 responses. However, if you look at this one, you see the attacker sent admin and a password, a strong password. Right after this request, the attacker received a valid response from the web server, which means that the provided credentials were correct. So now we know the attacker used admin and a strong password 123 to log in. Then we click on the /account. This is the page the attacker accessed right after logging in. And then we have a request to /account/user, change username, and followed by the SQL payload. This is where the attacker conducted the first SQL injection attack by sending in the first payload. Now, if you want to look at the results the attacker received, let's have a look first at the request, the GET request. Right click and select follow HTTP stream, and here we see the payload. We would look at the payload the attacker sent, and then we see the response from the web server using the blue font. Here we see the exact query that was executed by the server. Select ID, user name, email from users where username like %% or 1 = 1. This returns true all the time. That's why the attacker was able at the end to dump the data for all the users, including Alice, Bob, admin, and at the end we have the flag. Let's copy the flag from here and see where it is required. What's the flag? This one? This is the flag. And the question before this, what password does the attacker successfully identify in the brute force attack? We figured, we saw it was this one. Here, no, this one. It is a strong password 123. And in the last task, which is task 6, we explore web application firewalls. Web application firewalls are basically the solution to combat and detect web attacks. That doesn't mean you should not learn the skills to analyze logs and network packet captures, because even with a firewall, you're going to have sometimes to take a look at the logs and network packet captures created by a firewall. So basically, application firewalls do the job by inspecting the traffic and either allowing or denying the packet based on custom rules and built-in rules. Usually, built-in rules are created or come with the firewall when you first purchase a license. These rules block common attack patterns, SQL, XSS, CSRF, and deny from malicious sources, which means all IP addresses, known bad addresses that were registered by threat intelligence platforms as bad IPs or associated with known APTs are also denied by your firewall. Of course, depends on the firewall model. And of course, you can create custom rules based on your environment and based on the incidents that happened in the past, or incidents that you know it happened with other companies or other organizations, or based on threat intelligence, you can create custom rules. So we clicked on this. I don't know what is this. Okay. Right here, this is a simulation on how to create a custom rule to match specific indicators of compromise, such as an IP, user agent, or even a region. What do WAFs inspect and filter? So basically, WAFs stand for Web Application Firewalls, which means they inspect and filter web requests. They do not operate on network level. You still need an IDS to operate on the network level. Create a custom firewall rule to block any user agent that matches bot THM. So based on the logic laid down in this figure, we can just use if user agent to block any user agent that matches bot THM. So it should contains, I guess, and then the name of the agent, it is bot THM. Okay, create a custom firewall rule to block. So here we have, after we specified what is to be blocked or allowed, we specify here the action, block, challenge, or maybe allow. So here instead of the arrow, you could write then and then block. Let's look at the hint. Custom built rules are designed to meet. This is the hint you're looking for. Syntax: if field name. So we have if user, oh, we have a typo here, agent. Contains, that's correct, we got this right, value, we put the value here, then action. Guess it's right this time. Okay, and lastly, it is the conclusion.